Hello and welcome to another video that we're going to be going through, taking a look at the scriptures and seeing what they have to tell us and what God has to tell us. So let's go ahead and get into our quick study. I'm going to try to cut these down to about 5 minutes thereabout, but we're going to try to get through a lot of information in a small amount of time. So hang on and we will try to get through this. I heard a question that was asked at one point: why does God allow suffering? Well, he allows suffering, or what the question is more, why doesn't he take away suffering? And that's a very good question, a very important question indeed, but it brings to the fact that or the fact into question as to whether we have free will or not. And that's the biggest thing, because according to Romans chapter 1, about verses 18 through 32, the whole thought in there, there's a bunch of things within that text there, but a thing that we see repeated, or a phrase that we see repeated in Romans chapter 1, is that God gave them up to their vile affections, or to a reprobate mind, or to things that were unseemly, to sin. He gave them up. Now that's not it's not him giving up on them. He still wants them to be with him. He still wants us to be with him. But what he does is he allows them to go their way and to make the mistakes and to make their own decisions. He's not going to force someone to love him. He's not going to force someone to obey him. He always gives us the option. And our decisions, our choices and the things that we do, that brings about consequences and those actions. Now, that's not necessarily the case in every bit of suffering. But taking away all of the suffering takes the choice out of a lot of things. Most everything. So an important person to look at when we are looking at someone who is suffering, or someone who reacts to suffering in a very good way, I think is Job. Let's take a look at Job. In the book of Job, we're going to jump through this really quickly. Starts out in chapter 1, says, Job, that that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. He was a servant of God. He's one that serves God. Verse 2, he has a big family. Born unto him were 7 sons and 3 daughters. He was blessed. He had a substance of 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and a very great household. This man was the greatest of the men of all the East. He had a big estate. Now, going with that, this is what he had, but this is what he lost. Let's jump over to verse 13. Really verse 14. We're going to be jumping through the sections. Right here we have the losses of the donkeys, the oxen, and the servants. Verse 14 says, And there came a messenger unto Job, and said, The oxen were plowing, and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them, and took them away, yea, and have slain the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone am escaped to tell you. But that's not all. The sheep were lost too. Verse 16, the fire of God is fallen from heaven, and hath burned up the sheep, and the servants, and consumed them, and I only am escaped to tell thee. It wasn't a fire from God, it was a misinterpretation, or a misunderstanding from that servant that Satan was using these things. And we can go into that later, but we're going to try to cut through this. Verse 17, the camels were stolen and the servants were killed. Verse 18, the children died as well. But here's this, that all of this loss, here's the reminder. Here's what Job did. Did he curse God? No. Did he say, God, why have you done this? No. Look at verse 20. When Job arose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down unto the ground and worshipped, and said, As naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave to, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Now, with this being our amount of time, I'm going to cut it off in a second. Not only did he lose all of his goods, all of his family, practically, he also loses his health in the next chapter. Look at verse 7. And Satan forth from the presence of the Lord, and smote Job with sore boils, and from the sore of his foot unto his crown. He lost his health. He lost his good health. And then what about verse 9? When his wife said unto him, Dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. His wife's lack of faith, he practically lost her as well. Out of all those things, out of all the suffering, and we're not even going to get into right now the Job's friends that came, but out of all that, he still maintained his faith. He still had his faith in God. He still trusted in God and knew that God was going to be there for him and watch over him. That's something that we need to take of and apply to our lives every day. There is so much that we go through in this life. Not all of it is going to be good. God never promised us a life that is free of suffering. But what he did promise is that he's going to be there for us through that suffering. Thank you so much for joining us, and if you want more like this, join us on Sunday at 9:45 a.m. and worship afterwards, a Bible class and worship, and also on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. And then, if you have any questions, let us know. Put those in the comments, and we will get those answered. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.